Sweet. Great. Thanks everybody for joining us for another PHS Live. Today we're going to talk about PHS's work with congregational records. I'm nominally your host. My name is David Staniunas. I'm records archivist. I've been doing this job since 2011. I'm joined kind of in the wings by Allison Davis and Gabriella Zoller, who are going to be helping to moderate the Facebook and the Zoom Q&A. I was just going to begin by kind of talking about PHS's kind of broad services for congregations. Hopefully that will answer and anticipate any questions that you guys have brought to the table. And then I'm just going to actually go and do a demo of what it looks like when we accession records. Unfortunate that we actually have some new stuff to accession to actually like demo for you. So PHS is nearly 170 years old. We are a national archives with a national scope, and almost unique among, and I'm out of focus. Excellent. Almost uniquely among, archives with a national scope, we collect all the way down to the local level of bodies that produce records. In fact, the plurality of the material that we bring in any given year is from individual PCUSA congregations. To something to the tune of 350 cubic feet, 250 churches a year. There have been ballpark 40,000 odd Presbyterian churches in the United States across 300 years of history. We have in the building the records of about 12,000 of them. So we have a fair sampling of like the entire scope of local Presbyterian congregations in the country. So my job, I'm basically accessioner in chief. Any new collections that come into the building, I take them off the elevator, do a little bit of work on them, describe them, get them in a database, and then that is really the reason why I'm the person who gets to speak so frequently with individual congregations. Most congregations, when we begin to speak, are operating from like, I'm from a really kind of ground level baseline. Like, I'm a new clerk, I'm a church administrative assistant, and I have just opened up this closet. Our church is 150 years old. I've opened up this closet. There's all this stuff in there, and I have no idea what to do with it. And so our first task is to help people do kind of like bare bones archival appraisal. For congregations, we kind of frame this in terms of like 3 conceptual buckets. And the first conceptual bucket is records that are constitutive of the organization. These are the things without which you don't exist as an organization formally. So this is chiefly for us, session minutes and registers. If you can go into a big pile, open your closet, go into the pile, the first bodies you want to pull out of the wreckage are session minutes and registers. That's like a fairly small bucket of content. A church that's maybe 100 or 150 years old, has maybe had 100 members or so for that long, will tend to have 1 or 2 cubic feet of session minutes and registers. That's generally a pretty concise and dense amount of information. The second bucket is slightly bigger. These are records which are commemorative or memorial. So these are things that you can lose as an organization and still exist, but we value them because they are the kinds of things that add flesh and give flavor to the kind of bare bones, dry session minutes and registers. In this larger conceptual bucket, we think of photographs, photograph albums, audio and video recordings, scrapbooks, stuff like that. At PHS, we will happily bring in that kind of content on deposit alongside session minutes and registers. Sometimes folks ask us what specifically to do with photographs. Photographs for us do sometimes require a little bit more care and selectivity, right? So photography has been around since what, the 1830s. So 19th century photographs are by default like innately valuable to us. As the 20th century progresses, photography gets cheaper and more widespread, and we tend to take many, many, many more photographs. So we look at things like a late 19th century groundbreaking or a panoramic image of a church group. We value those very highly. Other kinds of things like a whole photo album of images from the same church picnic in 1991, that's either best served at the local level or best kind of selected out and appraised differently, maybe appraised out. So that's two things. So session minutes and registers, commemorative records, commemorative material. The third and the biggest bucket of content that congregations make is actually records to be records managed out of a permanent collection. So these are like records of daily business activities, daily business transactions. Every record has a function in context, right? We keep things because they serve a particular function. We keep the things that we classify as permanent because we think they're going to have ongoing utility for the rest of the foreseeable future. Everything else has a really focused and narrow period of utility, right? Most financial records have utility within a time frame of about 7 years, right? Financial records are important insofar as they allow you to be held accountable by civil authorities, right? 7 years is like the time frame within which you can be sued. You can be audited rather by the IRS, right? So financial records fit a time frame. Very frequently we'll get contacted by congregations who have all of a sudden found, wow, I've got all of these old books. I have these very old big ledgers in a closet and they're so valuable. And we have to ask them what's in them. And they'll say, oh, it's daily pledges from the congregation. It's weekly pledges from every member of the congregation going back to 1850. And we don't regard those as permanent. Most of the most important financial information that a congregation makes ends up getting reported in an annual congregation meeting or in an annual report, and those tend to be spread across the session minutes or else compiled separately. We recommend, you are free to dispose of those as you see fit. I could really go on at length about how the paper shredder is actually the greatest tool of archivists. And that might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's my position, and I'm a follower of Jerry Ham, who's, as far as archivists go, a famous archivist. Ham was state archivist of the state of Illinois, and he developed a really kind of stringent appraisal process, particularly around 19th century kind of bureaucratic administrivia. And his position was that the things you keep have the capacity to occlude research. If you just have too much stuff, it's impossible to get down to the most important content. It's a kind of white redaction. Instead of blacking things out intentionally, we do it accidentally by just dumping too much content on people. I've been talking for a little bit. I can pause. I think there might be a couple of questions in the Q&A. I can pause and then maybe we can start to talk about digitization, and then maybe I can hop up and do a demonstration.
Hi, David. Yeah, there's one question so far about a digital way to keep registers. So if you want, we can just hold off until the
Let's
next
do that.
part.
Yeah, no, I love questions.
Okay.
So yeah, digital register keeping. I'm going to back all the way up and say that our ongoing recommendation is that records that are permanent should continue to be kept on acid-free paper. We say this because, you know, we have recognized over the past 10 to 15 years that we are going to continue to live in a hybrid digital and paper environment, owing to the different virtues and vices that paper and digital formats have, right? So in terms of access and accessibility, there is absolutely no contest. Maintaining records in PDF makes them accessible to the widest number of people possible, the broadest number of people possible. There's no competing with it. We are never going back to microfilming records in terms of like how we create surrogates. That's totally clear. But what we have recognized over the past, you know, couple of decades is that it is very easy, especially for small organizations, to lose track of their most essential records if they're just kept digitally. I can attest to this from being part of a small group of archivists in Philadelphia, the Delaware Valley Archivist Group. You know, we're kind of in a cobbler's family has no shoes situation. We have no idea where our minutes are because we've kept them in Google Docs created by like a different secretary of the organization every single year. And we would really have more coherent minutes if we printed them in acid-free paper and carried them around in a Cokesbury binder. It seems counterintuitive, but if you really want something to last for the next 30 years, print it to acid-free paper. Right. By the same token, every church, very many of the churches that I've encountered, all have church membership management software, right? They have bespoke database software like Servant Keeper or ACS. And you kind of have begun to generate your register content beginning with a church membership software, you know, management system. There are different, these two things, these two ways of keeping records serve different functions, right? Church membership management is really about being able to precisely identify people and precisely target them. It contains email addresses, dates of birth, places of business, records of giving, which is all content that, you know, the kind of 30, 40-year period, they don't need to know it. What does need to be recorded permanently are ordinations of elders, chronological roll of members, alternately an alphabetical roll of members, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. So everything that has to be recorded, that's all written out in the Book of Order in terms of like what goes into a register. And if you want that to continue to exist for the next 30 years, you do it in paper in addition to having your church membership software. There is, and anybody who, by the end, we will distribute like my contact information, and there's going to be a follow-up email to anybody who was in the Zoom chat. So there are going to be many ways that we're going to reconnect. But one of the interesting things that we can pass along is an Excel spreadsheet that was developed a few years ago by folks in the Presbyterian of San Diego. The spreadsheet is designed to mimic the look and feel of like classic Cokesbury register pages. So you can have like a digital edition of your register that prints out directly to a Cokesbury page, or you can modify it to print out to non-Cokesbury pages, because there's nothing in the Book of Order that says you have to use Cokesbury products. That's totally fine. I hope that begins to answer some of your questions. Are there any others in the Q&A?
Yeah, I have one more from Linda. She was wondering, since churches don't pay taxes, are they still held to the 7-year guideline for keeping financial records?
You know, we're gonna rapidly reach the edge of my knowledge. There's gonna be, so we have a big list on our website of the varieties of records that we recommend people keep and the periods they should keep records for. That guidance has gone through a few revisions, but we rely on the advice of other financial professionals and records managers to develop that. So take a look at our website, see what fits and what doesn't, see if that comports with your operations. And if you're really in need of assistance, contact like your financial or legal professional. But this is like the sum of what we've learned over the past few decades.
David, there was another question about if you could speak a little bit more about acid-free paper. There was a question about how to manage newspaper, and I suggested reformatting it to acid-free paper.
Okay. Hopefully, so if you're in the mood to preserve newspaper clippings, which is another choice that is worth scrutinizing. So I'm going to go all the way back and say that, again, the first thing that we have to do as professional or volunteer archivists, our first responsibility is appraisal. For our interests as an institution, very rarely do newspaper clippings matter to us at all. I have, yeah, I mean, there are already so many services that have already digitized full runs of even very local newspapers that it's very rare for us to kind of like keep newspaper clippings. You may want to keep clippings yourself, you know, as part of a display or as part of, you know, a subject file about the church that you can refer to in the future. Newsprint and all other forms of paper that are derived from wood have inherent vice. They are going to degrade over time. Wood pulp has a chemical compound called lignin inside of it, which when exposed to water vapor, creates acids which turn the paper yellow and eventually make it brittle. There are incredibly expensive ways to mitigate that outcome, but you don't want to use any of them because they're ridiculously expensive and the content itself is newspaper clippings. If you need to preserve that content, the option before you is to digitize the content and to maintain, we do a step better than this, but you know, to maintain JPEG files that are at least 300 pixels per inch. That's what you got. Are there other Q&As? This is great. I'm probably talking too much.
Okay, we have one from Tom, and he has said that we have taken photographs of the registers and session minutes from the 19th century. How do you recommend organizing resulting pictures? Also, what data should we include with the images?
That's a good question. There are, I'm going to back all the way up and start to talk about some of our digitization services and how some people have approached digitization on their own. I was in a chat earlier this week where a congregation said that they had, they were interested in imaging records on their own and by themselves. And I don't think there's anything really wrong with doing that. You know, congregations own their own records and you're free to do with them as you see fit. I think that if you have the capacity to digitize printed text that's basically late 20th century, and you can do that without really harming the text block, I think that's fine. And I think that if you can do that and compile those files to PDF, that could be a thing that would be useful to serve your church. I will say that we have our own digitization operation. We are your national archives. And I think it's worth it to take advantage of our services. So we, Allison, who's on the chat, we image records for congregations to the tune of more than 100,000 pages every year. We have an overhead planetary scanner, so the camera head is mounted above any volume of text that we image. And it has a book cradle and a glass platen. So everything is designed to very gently manage a text block as you turn pages, and eliminate any possible gutter in a text block. We shoot at 600 DPI at 16 by 24 inches. The images start out as TIFF files, and we compile them to multi-page PDFs. We deskew the images, we color correct the images, and we apply OCR, which is, if anybody on the chat doesn't know, is optical character recognition. So we can make typewritten text Control-F-able in a PDF document. And we do that really well and really fast. My position is that congregations should use us and then free up the time of volunteers and administrative assistants to go and actually do the mission of the congregation. Like, this is something that we can take off of your plate. It won't take you 6 months to a year of doing it piecemeal, little by little. You should rely on your national archives to take on that responsibility. You're free to do it yourself. The place where I would really counsel congregations to not DIY is if you have bound 19th century minute books. I think that the further back you get in the 19th century, the likely you are to encounter records that are gonna experience some harm by being blasted by a photocopier. Now, the questioner said that you just shot them with like a cell phone or whatever. I'm sure you're not blasting them with photocopier light. But the further you get back in the 19th century, kind of the more damage you can do to the substrate of the records. That's all a long answer that's non-responsive. Sorry, Tom. Your real question is, how do you organize those pages, and what kind of metadata do you add to them to make them like accessible and legit? Short answer is that's going to depend, because I can't see what you've done and I can't like appraise it out. What we try to do is we try to keep a one-to-one relationship between the original record and its digital surrogate. So if we have a folder of correspondence, we create one PDF that is all the pages of that correspondence. If we have one book of session minutes, we create one PDF that is that book of session minutes. A thing you're going to want to avoid is just having 1,000 individual JPEGs representing pages in a book. You are going to, it's going to be very hard for you to maintain that one-to-one source to surrogate relationship. I've seen that kind of thing done by congregations. It tends not to end well, but I wish you luck. If and when you do compile all of your images to like a single PDF, we use PDF-A. The A stands for archival. It gets rid of a lot of the active functionality of PDFs and really is just designed to represent the text as it was in real time. So when you take your JPEGs and compile them to PDF-A, really the best thing is just to have a clear naming convention for your PDFs. So if you have, right, one-to-one source to surrogate relationship for your session minutes, just title it something like session minutes 1840 to 1860. That's really, you know, a kind of bare bones approach to do-it-yourself digitization.
All right. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, go.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but it might be beneficial for you to keep going with your
Yeah.
demonstration.
Let me just, I'm going to stand up and accession some stuff. Let's do that. Oh. Sweet. Okay, everybody hear me? Thumbs up in the chat. So again, we receive something to the tune of 250 shipments from congregations every single year. That's more than half of the shipments we receive. They come in typically by UPS. This one's by priority mail. And our first responsibility is to unpack everything and figure out what it is. Okay, I have a book of congregation minutes. Sweet. I have a register. You know, we were talking, and I have session minutes at the back. Excellent. We were talking about church registers, and one of the interesting things, even though I kind of was a little bit dismissive of the classic pre-post Cokesbury binder, one of the things that I love about the 19th century, 20th century register is that it's informationally dense, right? If you have one register, that might represent a congregation's whole membership for like 50 years. And you've got 50 years of membership data in one source that's easy to digitize, easy to represent. One of the interesting things that we've encountered in this work is responses to the problem of a church register being finite. At a certain point, a really gigantic church is going to run out of register pages, right? And so really gigantic churches occasionally have gotten involved in using new office technology. One of the really worst office technologies of the 20th century is the index card file. This is an office innovation that allows you to create a set of entries that is basically infinite. So that's why it's good. The reason why it's bad is you have created a set of entries that is practically infinite. And it is nearly impossible to represent a set of index cards in any kind of informationally dense way, right? In a church register, you're going to have one entry per person, one line at a time, which makes digitizing it like really efficient and creates a dense product. If you have a bunch of index cards, you have one person per card. So instead of 100 people on a page, you have 100 pages to represent 100 people. Sweet. Session minutes. Okay, I've got one clipping. Clippings in print ephemera. So I joke about this, but one of the key archival technologies or practices we call stacking, which is where you make stacks of stuff on a table because it seems like the stuff is related to one another. That is a bad looking book. So I've got congregation minutes, session minutes, print ephemera, what looks like a very old financial ledger. Oh, that's sweet. Yeah. Coming around. So this is old, right? This is a pretty old financial ledger. And if the content that's here is represented in like a church register or something, this is something that we can discard. It's not necessarily valuable just because it's old. This is what my son tells me. More clippings in print ephemera. That's interesting. Oh, this is good. This is like a really good sample of kind of like the kinds of things that people will send us. Sweet. Woo! I have a stack of annual reports. That's going to be a third step. So gradually, as I'm making my stacks, I'm thinking about how to get the stuff into a box. And how to get the box on the shelf. This is the content that you guys are really after, this box building. The one totally non-portable skill in my repertoire. Nobody's ever going to ask me to build a box again. This is interesting. Okay, certificates of baptism. So these guys, I'll move this closer to the camera for y'all. Very frequently we'll run into stuff like this, right? Which is a certificate book for baptisms, which has all the stubs that were issued to people. For our purposes, we rely on the idea of the item of record. There are lots of different kinds of records that will deliver the same information. For us, book of baptismal records or these stubs, that content is typically represented in a register. So if we have a register for this time period, this is also stuff that can go away. Great. Oh yeah. There's a real nasty decayed rubber band on there. That's cool. So if there are additional questions, I'm just going to continue to unpack this thing and I can answer questions while doing that.
Yeah, there's more questions, David. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there's a question from Facebook from Barry Smith. He was wondering, what is the best way for churches to store digital copies of records?
Great, that's an awesome question. Thanks, Barry. So I guess a couple of things to begin with. Whatever you're doing, you're going to want to store multiple copies of the same content in multiple places. For most churches, the easiest way to do that is to have like a copy on your local desktop or local network, and a copy in some kind of cloud storage like Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive or Dropbox or what have you. Just so that you're able to replicate content if something goes bad on, your first line of storage. Things that people do that they shouldn't do: don't store digital content on like really cheap thumb drives or flash drives. The quality of those drives varies really dramatically, and the more times you use a thumb drive or a flash drive, the more read-write cycles it has, the more likely it is to fail. Do not store digital content on optical media if you want to keep it for the very long term. We have seen optical media fail in our work in the 3 to 5 year time period. I mean, we have lost images and had to go back to the originals and rescan stuff because we thought it was fine to put stuff on DVD. So like we have learned the hard way about that. There's actually a really interesting, I think, ongoing study by the Digital Preservation section of the Library of Congress, where they evaluated the longevity of a whole variety of CDs and DVDs. And they exposed these CDs and DVDs to like artificial aging. So they would store them at like 150 degrees and 90% humidity for like 5 weeks. And that would impersonate normal storage for like 5 years, say. What they determined is that they couldn't tell anything about the longevity of optical media, like not a thing. Some kinds of optical media, they lab tested and figured they would last for 75 years. And the same manufacturer, the same CD made from the same factory on the same batch date, other CDs in the batch would have a shelf life of like 5 years. So it didn't even differ manufacturer to manufacturer, factory to factory, but within batches, nobody had any idea how long a given piece of optical media lasts. It's just one more reminder about like how incredibly, fragile and ephemeral our digital lives are. Turns out I can't answer complicated questions and do this at the same time, so I apologize for that. Anybody else?
I have a more straightforward question. Paula was wondering, should congregational meeting records be kept separately from session minutes, or can they be combined in the same book?
Doesn't matter. You can definitely spread your congregation meetings in your session minute book. That was really straightforward. Thank you for that. More certificates. Man, this is really like a soup to nuts collection. Okay, so again, we're beginning to get like a sense of what's going to be permanent. I have session minutes and registers. Those are my constitutive documents. I have minutes of other church groups. I have a deacon's minutes book. I have a stack of annual reports. We treat those as permanent. And then everything else, I have kind of clippings, print ephemera, temporary financial records, stuff that wasn't made by the church. Okay, that's PW. Right, so other councils of the church. I mentioned earlier that we're looking first and foremost for session minutes and registers. I didn't mention that we think of minutes of any council of the church as being of permanent value. So trustees groups, women's groups, deacons, youth groups, if they kept narrative minutes, we think of those as permanent. We'll bring those in on top. One of the questions that I got actually the other day was, when should we, as an active congregation, send records to PHS? And the person in question said, look, I've got a fireproof safe that's in the church office and it's full of books now and I can't use it anymore. Frankly, that is the perfect time to send records to PHS. It's a very frequent time to send records to PHS. We are here, really to serve as your chosen repository, and we can free up space for you. We can make records more accessible to the broader public. Something I didn't mention about putting records on deposit is that we make anything that is older than 50 years accessible to the general public. If it's older than 50 years, anybody in the world can come see it. If it is younger than that, we impose a blanket embargo on that stuff just to protect the sanctity of deliberations of session and congregation, and to kind of protect the personal privacy of people who are reflected in registers. Anybody who wanted to do research on congregation records that are less than 50 years old, power to open that is in the hands of the clerk of session. So the clerk of session controls the records. I got, oh, that might not be a photo. Yeah, that's a photocopy. Copy junk. I have additional annual reports and statistics.
David, I have another question for you.
Yes, indeed.
Catherine was saying that in New York City that they're having trouble finding archival paper, and was wondering if this was a widespread problem.
Wow, that's weird. I hadn't heard that, but I know there's been a lot of disruptions to, I mean, honestly, it's embarrassing to talk about disruptions to supply chains. And we were also talking about so many people's lives lost and so many people wounded by the epidemic. But one of the weird things that has happened, this was part of the reason why it was so difficult to get flour at the beginning of the pandemic. There wasn't a shortage of flour in this country. There was a shortage of paper being milled to put flour into little 1-pound bags. So I have no doubt that there's probably similar runs on paper. I haven't encountered a lack of acid-free paper personally here, but that's good to be aware of. Graham. I'm doing this demo and I don't have enough folders. I don't have a pencil. Will everybody excuse me while I run and get a pencil? Right back. Yeah, the show must go on. Okay, so at this point, I've identified the most important material, and my task is to give it item level description. We do congregation records at the item level, which is archivist jargon for saying there's a one-to-one relationship between what you write and what is there. 89 to 95. So the alternative would be to say, this is one box, it belongs to a congregation, there's stuff in the box. What we do is we say, there's a volume of session minutes, volume of session minutes, volume of session minutes, session minutes and register, item by item. Any more questions? Those are totally welcome.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Can you tell us about the need for and the format of finding aids?
Sure, I can. I'm going to drop all the way back and I hope, kind of call into question the nature of the finding aid as a universal form of archival description. There's actually a great article by Greg Weidman, who's an archivist at SUNY Albany, that calls into question how archivists have been delivering descriptions of records across history. For our purposes, for right now, for the thing that I'm doing today, we don't really, what our description is, it absolutely adheres to standards for archival content. So we describe everything according to DAX, which is Describing Archives, a Content Standard, which was promulgated in 2003. And it is the thing that guides us when we're trying to fill in the blanks of an archival description. So we will have a title, a date range, an extent, which is how much stuff is there, what kind of box is it in. And then we'll have our item description. We'll have provenance information. Where did it come from? What's their address? Are there any restrictions on its use? And as long as you have like a core set of answers to questions, right? Who made it? What is it? When was it? What's there? When did you get it and where from? As long as you have some kind of core answers to those questions, that's a valid archival description. That is a good enough answer for anything. Some of what we have done in the past, it used to be that the Society of American Archivists, which kind of promulgates standards for description, used to say things like, description flows from arrangement, which I have to tell you is a kind of meaningless phrase. It's the kind of phrase that emerges when you have collections that are already arranged by prior bureaucracies, right? That have already been in central filing and already been tended by legions of secretaries and administrative professionals, and presume that the archivist's job is ancillary to those people's jobs. In our work, we are the first line of contact for any kind of description. So, I mean, due respect, the idea of making finding aids is, you know, kind of moot. The thing that we focus on is making some kind of description, whatever you want to call it, immediately accessible. And that's one of the features of our online database, Shepherd, right? All of my work is public. Like every single thing that I accession, I turn on the record and it is public and live. Anybody can see it. That's really the thing that we're focused on. Keep them going.
Okay, I will. Could you elaborate or repeat, earlier in the presentation, you listed out some of the types of items a church would save, and Sherry was wondering if you could repeat those.
Yeah, I can do that. That list is on our website. So history.pcusa.org. Look for services, look for records deposit for congregations. The things that, really briefly, because this is a repeat for everybody else, session minutes and registers, minutes of any other council of the church, so trustees, women's groups, deacons, youth groups. We will also bring in photographs, photograph albums, audio and video recordings. Those are less important than the textual material that establishes what your church is. I'm running out of water. I'm gonna get some more water. And now I'm very close to you. Awesome.
Well, while you're drinking that, just a comment on Facebook from our friend Andrew Yeager Buckley. He said that you would get serious traffic if a webcam was set up streaming live anytime you went through new record arrivals.
AYB, I doubt that that's true. I appreciate it though. Do you want to see me make more boxes? I can do that. More questions?
David, can I pop in with one?
Please do.
Hello, David. Can you hear
I'm
me?
here.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Tom Nimick was wondering what you think about draft congregational histories, which I assume is, do you want all the drafts or do you just want the final?
Oh, I mean, it depends. I know that's always an unsatisfactory answer, but like it really does. I guess the first principle is the most important thing for you to do and for me to do is to keep the original records of the congregation, right? To preserve primary sources. We do rely on people to interpret those primary sources and write church histories, and we do bring those in. I think probably the best standard is if you have a church history and it just, you get it shoved into your book of session minutes and it lands here, that's fine. If you have a published church history, like a monograph that you have made hundreds of copies of, please do send us one, because Gabriella, who's on the chat, our cataloger extraordinaire, would be happy to catalog that and get that in our library collection.
Paula was wondering what happens to records that are sent to us that do not need to be archived.
So honestly, the lion's share of material that we get in the building from congregations, the plurality of that is from dissolved congregations. And so those records are governed by deposit agreements with presbyteries. And we have agreements with, G30107 in the Book of Orders says that all of the property and records of dissolved congregations becomes the continuing responsibility of presbyteries, the next higher order. So we have deposit agreements with presbytery that say archivists are responsible for determining what does and does not fit a collection. And so we rely on those. It's my habit to shred anything that doesn't fit a collection because I do not want the remote possibility that history enthusiasts would go dumpster diving through here and find something that they believe is important, but honestly is not. There is, nobody's gonna like dig this, but if you go to library school and you do an archives concentration, you are probably gonna read an essay by Friedrich Nietzsche called The Use and Abuse of History. Nietzsche probably is one of the forerunners to Jerry Ham's ideas about appraisal. Nietzsche talks about those who collect anything so long as it's old, items of bibliographic quizquilia. If it looks like bibliographic quizquilia, it's going in the shredder. I need folders. So anything that comes in here that is in rough shape or is in need of support, wow, like this, whatever happened to it, like this, we get that into an acid-free folder. That is 2 registers that have been jammed together. Holy frijoles. That's a nightmare. Okay. Anything like this that's been cobbled together, we do like bare bones preservation intervention, which is to just get the pages into a folder. That really is like, one of the questions we get is like, what is archival processing? Like, what does it mean and what is it for? And for me, archival processing is the series of interventions that are necessary to make a secure, authentic, and reliable digital surrogate, right? The point of me doing what I'm doing is to make it easy and viable to digitize the content. If we just dumped all of this paper into a box and then called up folks to digitize it, it would be a nightmare and work would need to be done on it in any case. This is bad. Please continue with questions.
Phyllis was wondering if we have a recommended style guide for electronic file names.
That's a great question. You may be disappointed to hear that the answer is no, we do not have a recommended standard for electronic filing. I'd like to hear more about what kind of filing and how. So I hope that Phyllis emails me, because that would be super. There are a lot of places where we our work overlaps with the work of administrative assistants in the church. And by no means do I want to impede your work or your progress. And that means that a lot of times we don't have an opinion about the daily business of the church. All right, that is 1843. Wow.
So this is some like 10 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago, I'm sorry, but earlier when you took the that light green book out of the box, Phyllis was wondering if you referred to it as PW.
I did. I apologize. It's Presbyterian Women. It's drawing right here. Is there a question about Presbyterian Women's records?
There's actually no more questions. You kind of rapid fire answered them all, but
that's awesome. I can continue to talk about our digitization program because I feel like I gave that sort of short shrift. Again, we shoot more than white bread. Allison and Cecilia shoot more than 100,000 pages a year, chiefly for congregations, and chiefly we're talking about session minutes and registers. That is a paid service. So PCUSA entities can pay 60 cents per page to get their content digitized. Researchers, we soak for slightly more money. Depositing records is totally free. I mean, effectively, all you would do is pay for shipping. Um, the cost of my labor and everybody else's is partially supported by per capita. So if you as a congregation have been paying your per capita, the thing to do is take advantage of the services that you've been paying for and use your National Archives. For anybody who doesn't know about it already, and I mean, we've had other PHS lives about it, a lot of the content that we digitize, particularly personal papers collections and national agency records, we push out to the internet via our digital collections known as Pearl. That address is digital.peaceusa.org. There are selected congregational and presbytery level records in there, and those are chiefly in there as part of our African American Leaders and Congregations Initiative. So for example, Allison and Cecilia imaged the records of the old Presbytery of Atlantic, which was one of the all Black governing bodies of the church. We got that up, a couple of months ago. Any other questions? Those are welcome.
Fran was wondering if we are keeping our session records at Missouri State Archive, could we still send other records to your facility?
I think the ideal situation would be to have all your records in one place. If that's the state of Missouri archives and that works well for you, then I would just continue to use them. I, of course, would like to see all Presbyterian records united in one place. That's a dream that's unlikely to come to fruition. The only thing that I would strongly counsel people not to do is to put records into the care of local public libraries. So like your city library, your county library. History has shown us that the local publics do not do a good job with archival records. Local public's lawyers in particular really want congregations to sign a deed of gift, deeding their records over to the library or deeding them over to the city or the trustees of the library or something like that. Whereas our relationship with congregations is entirely mutual, entirely about deposit, and entirely about congregational control of records. We have deposit agreements whereby if the clerk of session sends us a letter, we can send original records right back to the congregation, right? We are never going to prevent a congregation from getting access to their own records. I can attest that this has been a problem. There's a church in Chicago that has been trying to get its records back from the Newberry Library. I'm totally comfortable naming them for 15 years, and the Newberry is just saying no. So be cautious and really ultimately trust your National Archives. One of the key things that we have that's different from a local historical society or a local public is we have a dedicated staff of archivists who do one thing only, and that's work with Presbyterian records. There's no other entity that has that. Cool beans.
John was wondering, what is the safest way to ship out original documents?
That's an excellent question. We rely on UPS chiefly. You can use priority mail, but pound for pound, it's cheaper to use UPS. If, in case you weren't here for the unboxing, I'm sorry about that. The best way to pack records is just an ordinary, sturdy, corrugated cardboard box, and do what you can to make sure that the records are not going to shake around in shipment. So just insulate them from the edges of the box with either wadded newsprint or bubble wrap. If you want added security for a shipment of records, include my email address in UPS's free email notifications. Excellent. Oh man, that's such a pity. Oh, this is great. This church used to be must have started out as Cumberland, which is something that we see from time to time. Shout out to the Cumberland Church Archives. Shout out to Susan Knight Gore. Shout out to Bill Black, who's like the self-described last remaining historian of his own denomination. Cool. Oh yeah. Hey, look at this font. It sounds like there might not be any other questions, so I'm just going to show you guys cool fonts.
Yeah, there's no more questions, and it is 2:59, so you successfully survived the hour.
That's awesome. Great. Well, I mean, it's been a real pleasure to hang out with you guys. I hope that we learned stuff. I don't really even know where to go from there. It's been a pleasure. If you guys, I will make one pitch. We have been doing Zoom chats with gatherings of clerks at the Presbyterian level, and we're always eager to join a Presbyterian meeting, even if it's just to say hello and do a quick minute for mission. So if you or someone you know is a powerful person in Presbyterian, like a clerk or like an EP, you want to invite little old me to talk to your presbytery, I would love to come to your presbytery. Cool beans. Anything else for the good of the cause?
David, I just wanted to, I don't know if you said this at the top, that we're recording this, so there will be a recording of this available at a later date for people if they want to rewatch or share it with folks who missed. We'll put it up on our website once it's ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, there's we have a dedicated page for all of the PHS live events, and that's where we're keeping recordings of past events. So if you missed us talking about Pearl, or talking about our online databases, or talking about African American leaders and collections, you can go to that page and scroll through all of that content too. All right, it's 3 o'clock. Thanks for joining us for another PHS Live, everybody.